They used to say I lived small, that I didn't know how to seize opportunity, that I lacked ambition, that I didn't belong to the legacy the family had built over generations. They sat around tables draped in white linen, raised glasses of expensive wine, and spoke of success as if it were an inheritance. And I, a quiet shadow in the corner of the room, became the perfect subject for them to feel superior. What they didn't know was that every insult was a brick I quietly picked up to build the foundation for something they could never see: an empire that didn't need to bear the Calloway name, but carried all the values that name had long since lost. I didn't come back to reclaim recognition. I came to prove that some children are dismissed not because they are lacking, but because the light they carry doesn't fit the small rooms others try to trap them in. And when that light finally bursts forth, they will be forced to look again. Not because I shouted louder, but because they can no longer pretend not to see. This is not a story about revenge. This is the story of someone cast aside, who quietly built a whole world so vast those who once pushed her out no longer have a place to stand. Every month, the extended Calloway family hosts an extravagant dinner at the villa perched atop the hills of Santa Rosa Valley. There, the food is just a formality. What's truly being served is status. Stories of private getaways to Amalfi million-dollar deals recounted like casual anecdotes over wine. And tonight, as always, I, Evelyn Ross, sit in my usual spot near the fireplace, slightly out of view, easy to overlook. Garrett raises his glass, boasting about purchasing a ranch next to a tech billionaire's estate in Jackson Hole. Vanessa is no less showy as she casually reveals they've just closed on a vineyard in Tuscany, complete with a private path to the Mediterranean. I simply smile, sip my iced tea, and nod politely. They have no idea that the cramped duplex in downtown Portland they once mocked is actually the first property acquired by Rossford Capital, the company I founded 4 years ago. Nor do they know that just 6 months ago, I quietly became the majority stakeholder of Calloway Tower itself, the very place where they now gather, celebrate, and speak of me, as though I were nothing more than a shadow. Garrett tilts his head with mock pity, asking about my rental life, while Vanessa feigns surprise that I still haven't bought a house. Aunt Margot smiles with matronly sweetness, leaning in gently to suggest I should grow up and own something real. I don't correct them. I just nod. They think I can't afford a house. They don't know I own the entire block they're gossiping about. They think I've lost. They have no idea they're merely guests on a playing field I've quietly built. I don't need their recognition. I'm only waiting for the day the financial audit of Calloway Tower complete, with evidence of misallocated funds, embezzled maintenance reserves, and shady contracts lands directly in their hands. It won't be revenge. It will be truth. And truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs the right moment to be heard. The next morning, I stood alone in my office, the top floor of a glass tower in the heart of Portland, where early sunlight poured through wide windows, casting light across the dark wood desk and the thick stack of files awaiting my signature. This wasn't a space I was given. It was a space I built for myself from every number, every deal the family never bothered to acknowledge. Rossford Capital had grown quietly for nearly a decade, under a name unrelated to theirs, never mentioned at family meetings, never appearing in any of the news bulletins they followed. And for that very reason, when an emergency meeting was called at Calloway Tower to review financial risks from a new investor, none of them realized the person who would bring the entire room to a standstill was the renter girl they had mocked the night before. When I entered the boardroom, my navy blazer, perfectly tailored to fit my eyes, met each of theirs: Garrett sitting with his usual smugness, Vanessa scrolling through her phone, Aunt Margot sipping wine as if this were just another lazy brunch. But the atmosphere shifted the moment I placed my briefcase on the table, opened it, and introduced myself. Evelyn Ross, founder and CEO of Rossford Capital, the firm that currently holds 62% ownership of Calloway Tower and its affiliated real estate assets. Silence fell like a thick velvet curtain, sudden and merciless. Garrett leaned forward, visibly pale. Vanessa dropped her pen. Aunt Margot froze mid-sip. Only I remained steady, flipping through the audited financial reports, the spreadsheets showing how the maintenance fund had been creatively adjusted, invoices for repairs billed at triple their actual value, and the flow of untraceable expenses funneled to a construction company run by Vanessa's husband. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I let the numbers speak for themselves. The truth, when revealed at the right moment, doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be precise. And today, the truth was present, complete, undeniable, and on my side. They once thought I was an outsider. Now they understand I'm the one holding the keys. I didn't need to push the door too hard. The real shock had already happened the moment the numbers began to be read aloud. But what I was waiting for wasn't in the data. It was in the reactions. Garrett, the one who always fancied himself the strategic center of the family, now sat with his hands clasped, eyes wavering like a man just awakened from a power-soaked dream that had gone on far too long. I looked directly at him as I flipped to page 12 of the report. $2 million spent on roof repairs, an expense nearly 4 times over budget, ultimately routed to a company owned by you. Garrett opened his mouth maybe to explain, but I didn't give him the chance to find an excuse. Here are the quotes from 3 independent contractors, and here is the invoice from your company. I believe the IRS will find this accidental discrepancy very interesting. Vanessa had lost all color in her face by now, lips tightly pressed, and her phone, the one item she never let go of now, lay silent on the table. I didn't need to look to know she was already thinking of the series of interior design consulting contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that had been signed without any bidding process. When I mentioned the name of the company registered under her husband's name and the oddly matching dates of fund disbursements from the communal account, she finally spoke. Evelyn, this is a family matter. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I smiled, didn't argue, just folded the documents neatly and placed them in front of her. Vanessa, you once said I lived small, that I didn't understand what it meant to manage a legacy. But maybe you were wrong. A real legacy isn't a building or an investment fund. It's how you wield power without letting it corrupt you. What you and Garrett have done, that's not management. That's exploitation. I turned around and pulled out the final document, a letter of authorization signed by the independent board of directors, granting me full authority to restructure all operations of Calloway Tower. Starting tomorrow, the group's financial systems contracts and human resources will undergo audits based on international compliance standards. All internal contracts will be frozen. No more family deals. No more phantom budgets. No more treating Calloway like an open-ended credit card. Aunt Margot sprang from her seat, her voice trembling. Evelyn, you're tearing this family apart. I looked at her, not with anger, just steady and calm, and said, No, Auntie. The family was fractured a long time ago. I'm just the one cleaning up the pieces everyone else pretended not to see. No one said another word. The room grew heavy like a chapel without faith. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. And this time, the story would be written by the one they once treated like a crossed-out footnote. The weeks that followed weren't loud, but each day was an unraveling. A hollowed-out system built on reputation, on what the Calloway name used to symbolize, was now being dismantled layer by layer, every shady expense, every contract designed only to preserve power for a few who happened to bear the Ross name. And when I said reform, I wasn't just talking about a tower or a portfolio of properties. I was talking about how people perceive value, about whether a family can exist without lying to one another. I started with the smallest things, eliminating meaningless PR expenses, canceling an overpriced cleaning contract inflated to triple market rates, freeing up nearly $1 million in costs within the first 3 months. But more important than the numbers was the message that Rossford Capital didn't stand for revenge, it stood for a new standard in business and in being human. I kept the old apartment on Alder Street, the one everyone assumed I was too poor to move out of, not because it was convenient, but because it reminded me what brought me here: patience and a deep respect for small things. While Garrett was forced to liquidate real estate to repay misappropriated funds, and Vanessa faced a formal investigation for conflict of interest, I remained there, sitting in the courtyard of that modest building, listening to elderly residents tell stories about their grandchildren, about how they finally felt heard after years of living in the shadows of development plans that never once asked them what they needed. The irony was, most of the real value wasn't found in Class A office towers, but in these old rooftops with mossy balconies and the sound of children running through the halls. It was during that quiet space that my father came. Not as a father trying to reclaim position, but as a man finally willing to face the truth that he had lived inside a family he believed was strong, while everything had only held together through concealment. He didn't say much. He simply sat beside me on the old wooden bench, hands flipping through the reports I had publicly shared with the executive board. "Where did you build all this from?" he asked after a long pause. I looked out toward the courtyard where sunlight filtered through the old trees. "From the place where everyone thought I was just a poor cousin renting a flat." I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to praise me. I only needed him to ask, to want to learn. And for the first time, I saw that look, the look of someone who genuinely wanted to understand, no longer to judge. They once called me the one on the margins, the daughter who chose to live small. But from that very place, I built something they couldn't, something that could stand tall without hiding from anyone. And now they, the ones who once thought themselves the center, are relearning how to become a part of it. Not through status, but through transformation. Quietly, but profoundly. The winter gathering at Alder Street had no crystal chandeliers, no five-course menus, and no aged wine. We hung string lights by hand, placed wooden tables and chairs around the old fountain, and asked everyone to bring their favorite family dish. There were no speeches, and no one wore suits or evening gowns. But as I stood on the second-floor balcony looking down at the courtyard where children were playing tag around a small Christmas tree made from a real potted plant, I knew this was what I had spent my youth building. Not just a company, but a space where people could breathe without fear of comparison judgment, or being pushed away from the table simply for not fitting someone else's mold. My father stood by the hot cocoa table chatting with Mr. Keller, the World War II veteran who'd lived here for nearly 40 years. Vanessa was laughing genuinely in the shared kitchen, mixing gingerbread dough with the same children she once avoided, because she thought kids ruin events. And Garrett, who once sat atop a fortune, worth tens of millions, was now helping the younger residents build a makeshift stage out of leftover wood, without a single complaint. I didn't know how long they would change or how much of their kindness came from regret, but I didn't need to know. What I saw was that they were learning little by little how to show up as real people, not just names or titles. When my mother arrived later than everyone else, she wasn't wearing a fur coat or carrying a designer bag. Just an old sweater and eyes still red, but her gaze was strikingly calm. "You put together something beautiful," she said softly, looking around at the space glowing under the golden string lights. I offered her a cup of hot tea, and we sat together on the bench near the garden where I had hung a photo me at 23, beaming at my first real estate license ceremony. The photo I had once hidden, thinking no one in the family would care. She stared at it for a moment, then asked for the first time in years with an honest voice, "Why did you choose this path?" I smiled without hesitation, because I didn't want to live just to prove them wrong. I wanted to build something that made them have to relearn how to see the world properly. I don't know if I'll ever be forgiven. I'm not even sure if they've truly changed or are simply passing through a season of shame. But I do know this: the life I've created wasn't built for revenge. It was built to prove that you can step away from every expectation, every condescending gaze, and still build something so true that even those who once looked down on you must now bow their heads and start over. That night, standing in the glow of warm lights, watching people raise their glasses, tell stories, and laugh, from the heart I realized success doesn't always have to roar. Sometimes the deepest form of victory is simply living your values quietly and letting the world adjust to you. I don't need their apologies. I don't need them to call me the pride of anything. I just need them to live more kindly with their own lives. And if that begins with my story, then I've done my part. Not as the winner, but as the one who rewrote the definition of what it means to be right. I used to think I needed validation, that one day they would come back, apologize, and say my name as part of the family. But then I realized truth is more powerful than any apology. I don't need them to tell me I'm worthy. Because I walked the path myself, built everything from the ground up, and proved it through action, without needing an audience. This story isn't just mine. It's a wake-up call for anyone who has ever been underestimated, cast out of the conversation, or seen as a burden in the very home they grew up in. If you've ever suffered in silence, quietly built your dream while others dismissed you, remember you are not alone. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. How did you overcome being dismissed? What have you built in silence? And if you're still on that journey, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapters. Stories of resilience, rebirth, and how the underestimated become the ones who rewrite the rules of the game. Because sometimes the deepest revenge isn't making them regret, it's making them learn how to live from you.